In the dim, oil-slicked hangar of a remote airfield in wartime England, 1943, Frederick Harlan hunched over a workbench cluttered with blueprints and propeller fragments, the acrid tang of aviation fuel stinging his nostrils. The roar of Merlin engines testing nearby drowned out the distant thunder of anti-aircraft fire, a grim reminder that the war in the skies raged on without pause. Frederick, a lanky Canadian engineer from Toronto, had been plucked from his quiet life designing farm machinery to join the Allied effort, his expertise in aerodynamics now thrust into the heart of the air war against the Luftwaffe. At 32, with calloused hands and a perpetual smudge of grease on his cheek, he stared at the shattered remains of a P-51 Mustang's propeller, recovered from a dogfight over the Channel. The Messerschmitt Bf-109s, with their nimble turns and superior climb rates, had been outpacing the Mustangs, turning every escort mission into a deadly gamble for the bomber crews. Frederick's mind raced. He'd heard the pilots' tales, how the Germans' engines screamed like banshees, leaving the P-51s trailing in their wake. But tonight, under the flickering light of a single bulb, he sketched furiously, convinced that the key lay not in more power, but in smarter blades. 4 blades, he thought, instead of the standard 3, curved just so, to bite the air with relentless efficiency. The idea was audacious, whispered as impossible by his British colleagues, but Frederick felt the weight of every lost airman pressing on him. As the wind howled through the hangar cracks, carrying the faint wail of sirens, he wiped sweat from his brow and whispered to himself, "This has to work, or we're all just targets." Frederick's journey to this moment had begun 2 years earlier, back in the rolling fields of Ontario, where the call to arms echoed through every radio broadcast. Canada, though a dominion, had mobilized with fierce determination, sending over 1 million men to fight under the British banner, and engineers like Frederick were the unsung backbone. Assigned to the Royal Canadian Air Force's technical detachment in England, he arrived at the bustling base near Biggin Hill, a sprawling hive of tents and runways, where Spitfires and Hurricanes shared space with the new American P-51s, on loan to bolster the 8th Air Force. His superior, squadron leader Elias Thorne, a grizzled veteran with a scarred face from the Battle of Britain, had clapped him on the shoulder upon arrival. "Harlan, you're here because you think like the wind, unpredictable and fast. We need that against Jerry's aces." Frederick's team was a motley crew. Young Corporal Jamie Leclerc, a French-Canadian mechanic with a quick laugh and nimble fingers, and Dr. Miriam Voss, a sharp-witted aerodynamicist from Montreal, whose calculations had already refined Spitfire wing designs. They bonded over late-night tea in the mess hall, sharing stories of home, Frederick's tales of skating on frozen Rideau Canal, Jamie's memories of Quebec winters, Miriam's quiet pride in her immigrant parents' sacrifices. But beneath the camaraderie lurked a growing dread. Reports from the front lines painted a bleak picture. In the vast theaters over Europe, P-51 pilots like Captain Roy Landry, a Nova Scotian ace with 5 kills, returned battered, their planes limping home after futile chases. The Messerschmitts, with their Daimler-Benz engines pushing 350 miles per hour, danced circles around the Mustang's 390, but only on paper. In reality, propeller inefficiencies robbed them of that edge, especially at high altitudes. Frederick lay awake in his bunk, the canvas walls flapping like ghosts, haunted by a letter from his brother, serving in the infantry at Dieppe. "We're dying out here because the skies aren't safe," it read. That missive fueled his obsession. Over months he pored over wind tunnel data smuggled from Wright Field in the States, arguing with Thorne that a 4-blade prop could redistribute torque, slicing through the air like a Canadian axe through timber. Skepticism mounted. Propellers were sacred ground, unchanged since the Great War. But Frederick's prototypes, machined in secret from lightweight aluminum alloys, began to show promise in ground tests. The team worked feverishly, their laughter fading as the casualty lists grew, each name a stab to the heart. As winter gripped the base in 1943, the pressure mounted like a gathering storm. The Allied push for air supremacy intensified with the build-up to D-Day, and every sortie demanded escorts that could outrun and outmaneuver the Luftwaffe's hunters. Frederick's 4-blade design faced its first real trial in a mock run, but disaster struck when the prototype shattered during spin-up, sending shards flying like shrapnel. Jamie nursed a gash on his arm from the debris, binding it with a rag while cursing in French, his usual humor soured to bitterness. "This thing's a killer, Fred. Worse than the Jerry's." Miriam's equations confirmed the flaw. Harmonic vibrations at certain RPMs threatened to tear the prop apart mid-flight. Nights blurred into days, the hangar a forge of frustration, lit by welding torches that cast long shadows. Frederick pushed harder, his eyes ringed with fatigue, haunted by visions of P-51s plummeting in flames. Comrades whispered doubts. Even Thorne pulled him aside one foggy dawn, the runway slick with frost. "Harlan, if this fails, it's not just metal, it's lives. Landry's squadron lost 3 birds last week to those damned 109s. Emotional cracks appeared. Jamie confessed over cigarettes his fear of never seeing his fiancée again, while Miriam admitted the war had stolen her brother's letters from the front. Frederick felt the isolation keenly, a Canadian among Yanks and Brits, his accent a reminder of home's distance. Yet hope flickered in small victories, a refined blade pitch that boosted static thrust by 10% in lab tests. Rumors spread through the base of a top-secret evaluation flight, pressuring the team to deliver. As snow dusted the tarmac, Frederick stood alone by the prototype, tracing the blade's contours, sensing the precipice they teetered on. The war's relentless grind eroded their resolve, but the bond between them, forged in shared peril, held firm, a fragile thread against the encroaching darkness. The worst came on a bitter December afternoon, when the evaluation flight turned to catastrophe. Captain Roy Landry, strapped into the modified P-51 dubbed Maple Fury, taxied out under a leaden sky, the 4-blade prop gleaming like a promise. Frederick watched from the control tower, heart pounding, as the engine roared to life, the blades whirring into a hypnotic blur. Jamie gripped Miriam's arm, their breaths fogging the glass, while Thorne barked orders into the radio. The Mustang lifted off smoothly, climbing into the gray expanse, initial telemetry showing a 15-mile-per-hour gain, enough to close on a simulated Messerschmitt target drone. Elation surged through the team. For a moment, victory seemed tangible, the kind that could turn the tide over Normandy. But at 20, WW2 feet, disaster unfolded. The radio crackled with static. Then Landry's voice, strained. "Vibrations! She's shaking apart!" Alarms blared as the prop's harmonics resonated catastrophically, one blade shearing off in a violent twist. The P-51 yawed wildly, spiraling toward the earth in a plume of smoke. Frederick bolted from the tower, sprinting across the field as parachutes bloomed. Landry ejected, but the plane cartwheeled into a distant wood, exploding in a fireball that lit the horizon. The team arrived shell-shocked, Jamie retching at the wreckage, Miriam's face ashen as she sifted through twisted metal. Thorne's report to command was damning. Impossible design. Back to the drawing board. Frederick knelt amid the debris, fingers tracing the fractured blade, guilt crashing over him like a wave. Had he killed a friend? The base mourned, pilots avoiding his gaze, whispers labeling him a dreamer turned harbinger. In the hangar that night, alone with his sketches, the weight of failure crushed him. The war's machine ground on, indifferent, demanding more blood for every misstep. Yet amid the ruin, a fragment of the prop lay intact, its edge sharper than before, hinting at untapped potential if only he could conquer the flaw. As the sun dipped low, painting the smoke-blackened sky in crimson, Frederick rallied what remained of his resolve, poring over the crash data with Miriam by lantern light. The analysis revealed the culprit. A resonance frequency amplified by the 4th blade's added mass, but also an opportunity. If balanced with counterweights and refined airfoil curves, it could achieve the impossible, pushing the P-51 beyond 450 miles per hour, outstripping the Messerschmitts by 100. Jamie, bandaged but unbowed, rejoined them, vowing, "We finished this for Landry. He'd want it." Thorne, surprisingly, secured a second chance from higher-ups, swayed by Frederick's unyielding passion. But as they toiled into the dawn, a coded message arrived from intelligence. Luftwaffe engineers were experimenting with jet prototypes, the Me-262, threatening to render props obsolete. The clock ticked mercilessly, each test a gamble with lives hanging in the balance. Frederick glanced at a photo of his brother, tucked in his pocket, and steeled himself. The path ahead twisted through doubt and danger, but the fire of innovation burned brighter, promising a breakthrough that could rewrite the skies. The relentless chill of January 1944 seeped into the bones of everyone at the Biggin Hill base, turning the hangars into frozen caverns where breath hung like fog and tools slipped from numb fingers. Frederick Harlan, his face gaunt from sleepless nights, led the charge on the redesigned 4-blade propeller, incorporating counterweights forged from scavenged aircraft scrap and airfoil tweaks inspired by Miriam Voss's latest wind tunnel simulations. The team worked in shifts now, Jamie Leclerc's arm still in a sling but his spirit unbroken, as he welded reinforcements with a steady hand, muttering prayers in Quebecois under his breath. Squadron leader Elias Thorne paced the perimeter, his scarred visage a map of old battles, barking encouragement laced with urgency. Intelligence reports confirmed the Me-262 jets were no longer rumors. Prototypes had been sighted streaking over the Ruhr Valley at speeds defying gravity, 540 miles per hour, rendering propeller fighters obsolete relics. Frederick felt the noose tightening. His brother's letters from the Italian front grew sporadic, each one a plea for air cover that the current P-51s couldn't provide. In the dim glow of arc lamps, they tested the new prop on a static engine mount, the blade spinning up with a deeper, more resonant hum that vibrated through the concrete floor. Initial readings were promising, thrust up by 20%, no harmonic spikes below 3, LEU-0 RPM. But doubt gnawed at Frederick like rust on metal. The crash of Maple Fury haunted his dreams, Roy Landry's ejection a miracle that spared one life, but underscored the razor edge they danced on. Miriam, her dark hair tied back with a grease-stained scarf, adjusted her spectacles and plotted graphs that curved like hope. Efficiency gains that could push the Mustang to 460 miles per hour at altitude, enough to escort bombers deep into Reich territory without fear. Yet as flurries whipped against the hangar doors, a radio bulletin crackled. Another squadron mauled over Berlin, Messerschmitts claiming 4 P-51s in a single pass. The war's appetite was insatiable, and Frederick wondered if his obsession was genius or madness. Tension simmered not just in the skies but within the team, fractures widening under the strain of isolation and loss. Jamie, ever the joker, had lost his spark after the crash. He confided in Frederick one midnight, huddled over a thermos of weak tea, that he'd seen too many wrecks in his short life. Friends from training pulped in hurricane spins, his cousin lost to a U-boat in the Atlantic. "This prop, Fred, it's our shot, but what if it takes us all?" Frederick clapped his shoulder, drawing on memories of Toronto's steel mills where he'd apprenticed, forging parts that built the nation, now bent to war's forge. Miriam, the quiet anchor, buried her grief in equations, but Frederick caught her staring at a faded photo of her brother, a pilot shot down over Dieppe the previous summer. Their bond deepened in these confessions, a makeshift family amid the expatriate chaos of the base, where Canadian voices mingled with American drawls and British clipped tones. Thorne, sensing the morale dip, organized a rare morale boost, a screening of a newsreel in the mess tent, grainy footage of Canadian troops liberating Dutch villages. But it only amplified the guilt. Engineers like them enabled the fight, yet every delay cost lives on the ground. As February dawned with relentless rain turning the runways to mud, the second prototype took shape. Blades machined to micron precision. Hubs reinforced with vibration dampeners cribbed from submarine tech. Ground tests escalated, the Merlin engine bellowing like a beast unchained, prop wash scattering tools across the hangar. Frederick's sketches evolved into reality, each iteration shaving seconds off response times, but sabotage fears crept in. Anonymous notes warning of Luftwaffe spies, heightening paranoia. One evening, as they calibrated the pitch controls, a courier arrived with orders. The next test flight would be live, against real targets in a ferry mission over the channel. The weight settled on Frederick's chest like lead. Success meant rewriting aerial warfare, but failure could doom the D-Day Armada to unescorted slaughter. The live test loomed like a guillotine, scheduled for a blustery March morning when the wind howled from the North Sea, carrying the salt tang of impending doom. Captain Ellis Grant, a sturdy Albertan replacing Landry, volunteered for the cockpit of the upgraded P-51, Northern Star, his easy grin masking the tremor in his voice as he shook Frederick's hand. "Make her fly true. Harlan, we're counting on you Canucks to outsmart the Krauts." The team swarmed the aircraft, Jamie double-checking fuel lines while Miriam ran final diagnostics, her calculations predicting a top speed of 470 miles per hour if the props held. Thorne oversaw from the tower, radio in hand, as ground crew towed the Mustang to the runway's edge. Frederick stood at the blast fence, heart thundering, the four blades idle but ominous, their contours slicing the air even at rest. Engines ignited with a cough and roar, the prop accelerating in phases. 1 500 RPM clear, 2 500 steady, then full throttle at 3, WW0, the aircraft straining against chocks like a thoroughbred. Release came, and Northern Star surged forward, lifting off into scudding clouds. Initial climb rate surpassing specs by 15%. Elation rippled through the control room. Telemetry beamed back speed logs cresting 440, enough to outpace standard BF-109s. But as Grant pushed toward simulated intercept coordinates, trouble brewed. Interceptor chatter reported a lone Messerschmitt patrol, strays from a bomber raid, vectoring perilously close. Frederick's pulse raced. This was no drill. Radio bursts filled the air. "Bandits at 2 o'clock, closing fast." Grant's voice cut through, calm but edged. "Engaging. Props giving me the edge, turning into them now." The team clustered around the scopes, Jamie's fists clenched, Miriam murmuring probabilities under her breath. Minutes stretched into eternity, the distant crack of cannons echoing like thunder. Until Grant's triumphant report. "Splashed one Harlan. Your blades bit deep. She's a rocket." But jubilation soured as a second 109 latched on, its Daimler-Benz wailing, forcing Grant into evasive spirals that tested the prop's limits. Vibrations crept in, alarms whining faintly over the link. Disaster teetered on the brink as the dogfight intensified. The P-51's superior speed allowing Grant to loop and dive. But the pursuing Messerschmitt clung like a shadow, its pilot an ace by the look of his maneuvers. Frederick paced the hangar floor, now commandeered as a forward ops post, sweat beading despite the cold as feedback loops painted the drama in real time. Airspeed 465, altitude dropping to 10, the Ozo 0 feet, G-forces peaking at 6. Thorne bellowed coordinates, coordinating with Spitfire wingmen scrambling from a neighboring field, but the channel's vastness swallowed signals in static. Jamie slammed a fist on the console. "Come on, Ellis, shake him." Miriam's face paled as she cross-referenced data. The props were holding, but sustained high RPM stress risked fatigue cracks propagating like fissures in ice. Grant's transmissions grew clipped. "He's on my 6, prop singing, but she's heating up." A burst of tracers lit the radio imagination, the Mustang banking hard, its 4 blades churning air into a vortex that propelled it forward in bursts, gaining precious yards. The team held collective breath, Frederick envisioning the blades twist, each revolution a defiance of physics, born from Canadian ingenuity amid wartime exile. Then, a roar of relief. Spitfires arrived, diving into the fray, their cannons chattering as the Messerschmitt broke off, trailing smoke into the drink. Grant nursed Northern Star home, landing with a screech of tires, the prop windmilling to a halt unscathed. As he taxied in, cheers erupted, but Frederick saw the toll. Grant's flight suit singed, eyes hollow from the near miss. Post-flight inspection revealed microfractures in 2 blades, hairlines that could have sheared mid-turn. The victory was Pyrrhic. The design worked, outrunning the enemy by nearly 100 miles per hour in the chase, but perfection eluded them. Whispers of jealousy stirred among American techs, crediting their Merlin tweaks over Frederick's props, deepening his isolation. That night, as rain lashed the tents, he confided in Miriam. "We're close, but the jets. They're the real storm coming." Yet from the ashes of that skirmish rose a fragile optimism, the data fueling refinements that blurred the line between desperation and destiny. Over the following weeks, Frederick's team iterated relentlessly, integrating hydraulic dampers to quell the vibrations, drawing on feedback from Grant's logbook, speeds hitting 475 in level flight, climb rates that left standard Mustangs in the dust. Jamie, sling discarded, machined new hubs with renewed vigor, joking about naming the next bird Prophet's Fury, after their prophet-like engineer. Thorne leveraged the success to wrangle more resources, including a classified alloy from Ottawa's labs, lightweight and resilient, promising to push boundaries further. But shadows lengthened. A briefing revealed Me-262 squadrons deploying in numbers, their jet screams heralding a new era where props might fade into history. Frederick pored over captured Luftwaffe specs, his mind a whirlwind, calculating how his 4-blade marvel could bridge the gap until jets of their own arrived. Personal tolls mounted. Letters from home spoke of rationing and blackouts, his brother's unit pinned down in Anzio without air support, each missive a spur. Miriam uncovered a flaw in the hub assembly during a stress test, averting another catastrophe, her insight saving the project anew. As spring teased the English countryside with green shoots, the base buzzed with D-Day preparations, escorts vital for the invasion fleets. Frederick stood atop the tower one dusk, watching a flight of P-51s drill, their props a symphony of potential. The path forked, triumph that could immortalize Canadian grit, or failure consigning them to footnotes. A urgent wire arrived from command. Full operational trials imminent, with lives on the line over Normandy's beaches. The engineer's impossible dream teetered, blades ready to carve history or shatter upon it. April's tentative warmth did little to thaw the urgency gripping the Biggin Hill base, where the air hummed with the ceaseless drone of taxiing aircraft and the sharp commands of ground crews preparing for the invasion's shadow. Frederick Harlan, his once lanky frame now honed by relentless labor, oversaw the final assembly of the third prototype propeller, its 4 blades forged from the new Ottawa alloy that gleamed under the hangar lights like polished ice. The design had evolved through blood and fire, counterweights embedded to silence vibrations, airfoils sculpted with Miriam Voss's precision to minimize drag, and hubs reinforced against the torque that had felled earlier attempts. Jamie Leclerc, his arm fully healed but scarred like the rest of them, torqued the final bolt with a grunt, his French-Canadian accent thick with exhaustion. "She's a beauty, Fred, faster than a Montreal streetcar on payday." Miriam nodded from her station, spectacles perched on her nose as she verified the balance on a whirring test rig, the blades spinning without a wobble, telemetry spiking to unprecedented efficiencies. Squadron leader Elias Thorne entered, his limp more pronounced from the damp, clutching a dossier stamped with top-secret seals. "Harlan commands greenlit operational trials. Full squadron integration over the channel next week. Escort a bomber wing to mock targets in occupied France. If your props deliver, we'll outfit the lot before the boats hit Normandy." Frederick felt a surge of vindication mixed with dread. The Me-262 jets loomed in briefings, their afterburners turning the sky into a graveyard for prop-driven foes. But his creation promised a bridge, a Canadian edge to buy time. Yet as they packed tools away, a shadow crossed the threshold. Captain Ellis Grant, nursing a bandaged hand from the dogfight, his eyes shadowed. "She flew true last time, but those microfractures. One wrong gust, and I'm confetti." The team's fragile hope teetered, bound by oaths unspoken, as distant thunder rumbled. Not weather, but the first salvos of spring offensives. The trials commenced under a sky bruised with clouds. The P-51 squadron, now dubbed the Maple Wings, lined up like arrows on the rain-slicked runway, each fitted with Frederick's 4-blade marvels. He stood at the dispersal hut's edge, clipboard in hand, watching as pilots climbed aboard. Grant leading in Northern Star, flanked by fresh faces like Lieutenant Alec Donovan, a Saskatchewan farm boy with a pilot's steady gaze, and Flight Lieutenant Nora Hale, one of the few women ferrying supplies but cleared for this run, her resolve as unyielding as the prairie winds. Thorne coordinated from the tower, his voice crackling over the net. Formation Alpha, props to idle, check systems. Engines coughed to life, the Merlin snarling in unison, blades accelerating in a symphony that sent gusts rippling across the grass. Frederick's heart clenched as the first Mustang, Star, thundered down the strip, lifting off with a grace that belied its power. Climb rate indicators on the ground scopes leaping 20% beyond norms. The formation coalesced at 15, EO0 feet, vectors streaming toward a coastal convoy simulation crawling with dummy U-boat markers. Initial reports flooded in, speeds holding at 450 miles per hour in cruise, the props bite allowing tighter turns without stall warnings. Miriam monitored from a side console, her fingers flying over dials, while Jamie paced, chain-smoking to mask his nerves. "They're dancing with the wind, eh? No more chasing shadows." But elation fractured as vector anomalies blinked. Unidentified contacts, real Luftwaffe scouts probing the perimeter, drawn by the drill's radio chatter. Grant's voice cut sharp. "Bandits inbound, bearing 270, 109s, 3 of them, high and fast." Frederick bolted to the radio, Thorne already vectoring reinforcements. But the intercept was upon them. The P-51s broke formation, props whirring to full pitch, accelerating into the fray with a velocity that closed distances in heartbeats. Tracers arced across the scopes, the air battle unfolding in staccato bursts, each pilot leveraging the speed edge to dictate terms. Chaos erupted over the slate-gray channel, where whitecaps churned like the turmoil in Frederick's gut as he tracked the engagement from the ops room, maps pinned with frantic annotations. Lieutenant Donovan's Mustang twisted through a Luftwaffe pincer, his 4 blades propelling him into a scissors maneuver that left a Messerschmitt trailing smoke, splashing into the waves below. "Confirmed kill! Props are gold, Donovan whooped, but Nora Hale's transmission faltered. On my tail, can't shake him. Her P-51, lighter on fuel for the ferry roll, strained under the prop's torque, vibrations creeping in as she dove to evade cannon fire stitching the sky. Grant looped back, his star, a silver streak at 470 miles per hour, the blade's efficiency turning pursuit into predation. He raked the 109 with 50 caliber fury, sending it spiraling. Yet the third bandit, piloted by a cunning ace, exploited a cloud bank, emerging to latch onto Hale's 6. Frederick shouted coordinates into the mic, his voice raw. "Brake left, Nora. Use the speed." She complied, the prop's thrust surging her forward in a burst that widened the gap, but not before a shell grazed her wing. Alarms blaring structural warnings. Jamie cursed, slamming the table, while Miriam cross-plotted escape vectors, her calm fracturing into urgency. Thorne's reinforcements, Spitfires from Manston, streaked in, tipping the scales. But the cost mounted. One P-51 limped home trailing oil, its pilot, a young Toronto recruit named Silas Reed, ejected over friendly waters, rescued sodden but alive. Back on base, as the squadron landed amid cheers and medics, Frederick rushed to Hale's bird, inspecting the props, intact but stressed, hairline flaws echoing the prior fractures. Grant clasped his shoulder. "You gave us wings, Harlan. Those Jerrys couldn't touch us at speed." But the victory rang hollow. Reed's bailout underscored the gamble, and intelligence confirmed the scouts had radioed positions, inviting deeper raids. In the hangar's stifling aftermath, dissected under arc lamps that buzzed like angry hornets, the props revealed their secrets and sins, efficiencies that outstripped Messerschmitts by a clean 100 miles per hour in straight-line chases, climb rates shaving minutes off intercepts, yet vulnerabilities in prolonged dogfights where torque twisted metal under sustained fire. Frederick, sleeves rolled to elbows, grease-blackened hands probing the alloys, conferred with Miriam as she logged the data. The dampers held 80%, but at max RPM in turns, resonance builds. We need adaptive pitch controls, something to flex mid-flight. Jamie, wiping sweat from his brow, nodded grimly, his humor fled. Like giving the blades a brain, no? Otherwise, we're arming the enemy with our own shrapnel. Thorne loomed in the doorway, face etched with command's impatience, relaying orders for immediate retrofits ahead of D-Day's eve. The base thrummed with activity, Canadian engineers like them scattered across the Allied web, their innovations the invisible threads holding the aerial umbrella. But personal tempests raged. A telegram arrived for Miriam, confirming her brother's plane lost in a raid over Caen, her stoic facade cracking as she folded the paper, tears unspoken. Frederick pulled her aside, sharing a flask of contraband rye. "We build this for them, all of them. Your brother Landry, Reed's close call. It's not just speed, it's survival." Their bond, tempered in failure, solidified, a quiet vow amid the clang of hammers. Yet doubt festered. Whispers from American liaison officers dismissed the props as a colonial tweak, crediting Packard Merlins, fueling Frederick's isolation as a Canuck outsider. As night fell, he sketched feverishly, the impossible inching toward reality, but the Jets' shadow lengthened. Reports of Me-262s downing bombers unescorted. A harbinger that props, even supercharged, might bow to the future. The relentless push toward operational supremacy fractured the team further, each retrofit a battle against time and physics, the hangar a cauldron where hope and hubris boiled over. Frederick orchestrated the upgrades, integrating prototype hydraulic actuators scavenged from tank hydraulics, allowing the blades to adjust pitch dynamically, flatter for speed, steeper for thrust, pushing simulated peaks to 480 miles per hour in wind tunnel Machs. Jamie machined the components overnight, his hands blistering, driven by a letter from his fiancée in Quebec, promising a post-war life if he returned whole. "No more half measures, Fred. This war's eating us alive." Miriam, grief channeled into genius, refined the algorithms for the actuators, her equations predicting a 20-mile-per-hour buffer against the BF-109's best, enough to escort the invasion fleets unscathed. Thorne secured a covert test, a night flight with Grant at the controls, Northern Star vanishing into the moonlit void, returning with logs that sang of triumph. Dogfight simulations against towed targets, evaded and destroyed with ease. But elation soured in the debrief. Grant reported fleeting instability at 25,100 feet, where thin air amplified stresses, a ghost of the harmonics that killed Landry. Frederick lay awake in his bunk, the canvas walls whispering of home's distant call, Toronto's harbors. His brother's fading replies from Anzio, now silent amid mounting casualties. Paranoia crept too, a tool misplaced, blueprints rifled, suspicions of spies amid the multinational throng. As May bloomed with deceptive peace, Command issued the ultimatum, full deployment for the Normandy run, P-51s with Harlan props to shield the Armada from Luftwaffe swarms. The engineer stood by the flight line at dawn, watching a drill formation slice the sky, their speed a blur that humbled standard birds. Pride swelled, but terror gnawed, one flaw, and the beaches would run red without cover. A courier's urgent dispatch arrived. Luftwaffe jets scrambled for intercept, the ultimate test looming, where Canadian steel would clash with Teutonic fire. The Four Blades legacy forged in the crucible of invasion's dawn. The eve of D-Day cast a pall over Biggin Hill, where the airbase transformed into a fortress of frantic preparation, tents bulging with munitions and mechanics swarming like ants over the P-51 fleet. Frederick Harlan directed the final installations of the adaptive pitch propellers, his command sharp amid the clang of wrenches and the growl of idling Merlins, each four-bladed unit now a symphony of hydraulics and alloy precision. Jamie Leclerc, sweat-soaked and determined, fitted the last actuator to Lieutenant Alec Donovan's Mustang, his scarred arm a testament to the trials endured, while Miriam Voss calibrated the systems from a makeshift bench, her eyes red-rimmed from nights blurred by calculations and unspoken loss. Squadron leader Elias Thorne strode through the chaos, his limp forgotten in the adrenaline surge, briefing the pilots on the mission, escort the first waves of the invasion armada across the channel, shielding troop transports from Luftwaffe intercepts until the beaches secured a foothold. Frederick felt the gravity of it all pressing down, his Toronto route seeming a lifetime away as he inspected the blades on Captain Ellis Grant's Northern Star, their contours promising speeds that could rewrite the aerial balance. 480 miles per hour in bursts, outstripping Messerschmitts by a margin that turned hunters into prey. Yet doubt lingered like exhaust fumes. The microfractures from prior stresses haunted him, and intelligence whispers of Me-262 jets massing near Calais added a razor edge to every adjustment. As dusk fell, the team shared a silent meal in the mess, Jamie cracking a rare joke about outrunning the devil himself. But Frederick saw the fear in their eyes. Nora Hale, bandaged from the last skirmish, gripping her fork too tightly. Her resolve a fragile shield against the unknown. Tensions peaked as the clock ticked toward H-hour, the base a hive of shadowed figures under blackout lamps, where Frederick pored over final diagnostics with Miriam, their heads bent over glowing oscilloscopes that traced the props' responses to simulated stresses. The adaptive pitch had proven revolutionary in ground runs, blades flattening for supersonic edges in dives, steepening for torque in climbs, efficiencies that shaved drag by 15% and propelled the Mustangs into realms once reserved for dreams. Jamie, ever the pragmatist, tested the hydraulics manually, oil slicking his hands as he mimed flight maneuvers. His Quebecois mutters a prayer for the pilots who would trust this creation with their lives. Thorne gathered the squadron in the briefing tent, maps unrolled like wounds across the table, detailing vectors over Sword and Juno beaches, Canadian sectors where boys from the prairies and maritimes would storm the sands under their aerial umbrella. Frederick stood at the back, heart pounding as Grant volunteered for point, his Albertan drawl steady. These props'll make us ghost to Jerry, faster than their eyes can track. But cracks in morale surfaced. Lieutenant Donovan confessed to Frederick privately, his farm boy innocence frayed, fears of bailing into enemy waters gnawing at him after Silas Reed's close call. Miriam, composing herself after her brother's confirmed fate, adjusted a valve with trembling fingers, whispering to Frederick that the data showed resilience, but war's chaos defied numbers. Outside, the wind carried the distant rumble of bombers assembling, a prelude to the storm, and Frederick traced a blade's edge, feeling the pulse of innovation against the tide of mortality. Their work a Canadian lifeline stretched thin across the channel's maw. The launch unfolded at midnight's cloak, the runway a ribbon of fire under hooded lights, P-51s of the Maple Wings taxiing into position with props idling like predators at rest. Frederick watched from the blast wall, clipboard forgotten, as Northern Star led the formation skyward, Grant's voice crackling over the radio. Systems green, props singing smooth. The squadron climbed in echelon, vanishing into the inky void toward the assembly points off Portsmouth, Where the Armada waited, a forest of silhouettes bristling with guns, troop ships laden with the flower of Allied youth. Miriam monitored telemetry from the ops hut. Graphs spiking with approvals. Cruise speeds at 440. No vibrations under load. The four blades devouring air with insatiable hunger. Jamie paced beside her, chain-smoking, his sling long discarded but tension coiling his frame like a spring. Thorne coordinated with Coastal Command, vectors feeding in real time as the Mustangs linked with B-17 wings, their props a protective whirl around the lumbering giants. Frederick joined the radio watch, breath held as first contacts blinked on scopes. Luftwaffe night fighters probing from Cherbourg, Bf-101s slinking through cloud layers at 350 miles per hour. Grant's report cut the static. Intercepts at Angels 20, engaging with props full pitch. The air battle ignited in bursts, tracers stitching the dark as the P-51s surged forward, their speed edge closing gaps in seconds, blades twisting air into weapons that propelled dives at 470, outmaneuvering the Germans in high-speed passes. Donovan splashed one, his whoop echoing. Harlan's magic couldn't touch us. But Nora Hale's transmission wavered, banded on tail, props straining in the turn. Frederick shouted adjustments, the adaptive systems responding, flattening blades to break away, but the fray intensified, Me-110 destroyers joining the hunt with heavier guns. Disaster loomed as the escort pushed toward the French coast, the channel below a cauldron of foam from naval barrages, while above, the dogfight devolved into a maelstrom of twisting fuselages and cannon fire. Grant looped through a Messerschmitts swarm, his star, a silver arrow at peak velocity, the prop's hydraulics humming seamlessly to maintain 480 in the chase, raking two foes with 50 caliber streams that sent them plummeting. Yet the jets arrived unannounced, Me-262 streaking from the east like comets, their afterburners shrieking at 540, rendering the prop's advantages moot in raw speed. Frederick's blood ran cold in the ops room, scopes painting the horror as a Tucson-62 latched onto Donovan's 6, its 30mm cannons barking shells that shredded a wingtip. "Evasive! Use the climb!" Frederick urged, but the Mustang faltered, props clawing for altitude where thinner air taxed the blades, micro-stresses building undetected. Jamie slammed the console. "The jets! They're devils!" Miriam cross-referenced frantically, confirming the props held under duress, but the jet's agility and burst forced the squadron into defensive scatters, bombers veering under fire. Hale dove to aid Donovan, her lighter bird twisting with prop thrust that outturned a pursuing 109, but a 262's pass grazed her fuselage, alarms wailing as hydraulics leaked. Grant vectorized a counter, the four blades propelling him into an intercept that forced the jet to overshoot, buying seconds for Spitfire reinforcements to swarm. The battle raged, losses mounting, two P-51s spiraling into the sea, pilots' ejections blooming like desperate flowers. But Frederick's design shone in the melee, speeds allowing escapes that standard birds couldn't dream, outpacing Messerschmitts by 100 in retreats, even if the jets demanded new tactics. In the battle's furious coda, as dawn's first light bled over Normandy's cliffs, the Maple Wings disengaged with the Armada intact, beaches erupting in smoke and surf below where Canadian troops hit the wire. Frederick exhaled shakily in the hut, tallying reports. 5 kills confirmed. 3 Mustangs down. But most pilots fished from the drink, the props enduring where failure could have doomed the landings. Grant landed first, Northern Star, screeching to a halt with blades unscathed, though post-flight checks revealed hairline fatigue in the actuators from jet-induced strains. The team swarmed the tarmac, Jamie embracing Donovan as he taxied in. Nora Hale's bird limping but airborne, her grin fierce through the canopy. Thorne clapped Frederick's back. "You turned the tide, Harlan. Those props gave us the window." Yet victory tasted of ash. Miriam tallied the losses, her voice hollow, while intelligence confirmed the jet's toll, unscathed but harbingers of escalation. Frederick knelt by a returned prop, fingers tracing the scars, pride mingling with the grim knowledge that innovation lagged war's hunger. As medics tended the wounded and the base braced for counterstrikes, a runner delivered urgent orders. Retrofit the fleet en masse, with Harlan's blades at the core, but whispers of experimental jet pursuits stirred, Canada's contribution etching deeper into the skies, yet the horizon darkened with unresolved threats. The roar of victory mingled with the ceaseless hum of engines as the Biggin Hill base settled into a fragile rhythm in the weeks following D-Day. The Normandy beaches now a sprawling Allied foothold, scarred by craters and the echoes of liberation. Frederick Harlan moved through the hangars like a ghost of his former self, his lanky frame bent under the weight of endless retrofits, directing teams of mechanics who fitted the adaptive pitch propellers onto wave after wave of P-51 Mustangs destined for the European theater. The four-blade design, once derided as impossible, had proven its mettle over the Channel, allowing the Maple Wings to outpace Messerschmitt Bf-109s by a decisive 100 miles per hour in critical chases, their blades twisting air into a vortex that turned defensive scrambles into offensive strikes. Captain Ellis Grant, fresh from debriefs with his bandaged hand wrapped in fresh gauze, clapped Frederick on the back amid the clang of tools, his Albertan grit shining through the exhaustion. Those props didn't just save the Armada, Harlan. They carved a path for the ground pounders. Jerry's aces are pulling back, whispering about Canadian witchcraft in their cockpits. Miriam Voss, her grief for her brother a quiet undercurrent now channeled into relentless refinements, pored over post-mission data at a cluttered desk, her spectacles reflecting the glow of oscilloscopes that charted vibration dampening at sustained 480 miles per hour. Jamie Leclerc, his scarred arm a badge of survival, machined replacement hubs with renewed fire, joking hoarsely about the blades being sharper than a Mountie's blade, though his eyes betrayed the toll of lost comrades like Silas Reed, who had returned from the drink only to face another sortie. Squadron leader Elias Thorne, his scarred face creased with rare approval, secured commendations from Ottawa, crediting the Canadian engineers for tipping the aerial scales. Yet amid the triumphs, Frederick felt the hollowness. The Me-262 jets had exposed the props' limits, their jet streams mocking the whir of pistons, forcing tactics that relied on numbers over individual speed. As convoys of trucks rumbled in with fresh alloys from home, Frederick traced a blade's edge, wondering if his impossible dream was merely a bridge to obsolescence. The war's insatiable maw, demanding ever more. Summer's tentative grip on England brought a surge of deployments. The P-51 squadrons outfitted with Harlan's propellers sweeping the skies over France like avenging spirits, their enhanced velocities enabling deep penetrations into German-held territory that standard models could only dream of. Frederick's team expanded, drawing in fresh Canadian talent, young engineers from Vancouver and Halifax, their accents a balm to his homesick soul. But the core remained. Miriam's equations evolving the actuators for even finer pitch adjustments, Jamie's welds holding firm under stresses that would have shattered lesser designs. In one harrowing escort over the Falaise Pocket, Lieutenant Alec Donovan's Mustang, blades singing at full throttle, outran a squadron of Bf-109s, pursuing a limping B-24 Liberator, closing the loop to down 3 foes before reinforcements arrived, his radio crackle triumphant. Harlan's magic again, couldn't lay a glove on us at speed. The prop's efficiency, pushing cruise to 450 miles per hour with minimal fuel burn, extended range by crucial margins, allowing uninterrupted cover for the advancing Canadian First Army as they pushed toward Caen. Frederick monitored from a forward airbase near Bayeux, the acrid smoke of battle drifting on the wind, his heart swelling with each report of splashed enemies, yet twisting at the losses. The jets, now in fuller force, claimed pilots in hit-and-run passes, their 540-mile-per-hour dashes evading even the fastest P-51 pursuits. Nora Hale, her resolve hardened by survival, led a ferry wing back from a raid, her bird's props unscathed despite a grazing 30mm round, confiding to Frederick in the makeshift hangar that the blades felt like extensions of her will, responsive and alive. Thorne, coordinating with American 8th Air Force brass, advocated fiercely for mass production, his reports to London emphasizing how the four-blade innovation had reduced escort attrition by 30%, turning the Luftwaffe's nimble hunters into sitting ducks. Personal letters from Frederick's brother in Italy arrived sporadically, praising the air cover that his infantry now enjoyed, crediting those Toronto whirligigs for keeping Stukas at bay. But isolation gnawed. American techs still grumbled about the colonial props. And Frederick lay awake in his tent, the canvas walls alive with the distant drone of patrols, questioning if the speed edge was enough against the jet age dawning. As autumn leaves turned the Normandy hedgerows to fire, the Harlan propeller became legend among Allied pilots, retrofitted across RCAF and RAF squadrons, its 4 blades a symbol of Canadian tenacity that outstripped Messerschmitts not just in velocity, but in the psychological blow it dealt the enemy. Frederick, promoted to lead technician for the Air Division, oversaw trials in the Ruhr Valley, where P-51s with his design dove through flak barrages at 470 miles per hour, their adaptive pitch allowing seamless transitions from high-speed intercepts to tight dogfight loops, claiming aces who once terrorized bomber streams. Merriam's innovations peaked with a software-like calibration for the hydraulics, using rudimentary governors to anticipate stresses, pushing sustained speeds to 485 in level flight, enough to force Mi-109 pilots into desperate climbs where their Daimler-Benz engines faltered. Jamie, now a corporal with a chest full of mentions, trained newcomers on maintenance, his Quebecois tales of the project's birth inspiring wide-eyed recruits, though he confided to Frederick over rationed coffee that the war had stolen his youth, leaving only the grind. In a pivotal clash over the Siegfried Line, Captain Grant's Northern Star led a wing against a mixed formation, the prop's torque enabling a pincer that downed 5 bandits while evading 2 Mi-262 jets through superior low-altitude agility, Grant's voice booming over the net. "These blades are our revenge, faster than their fear." The success rippled through command, with Winston Churchill himself noting in a dispatch the Yankee-Canadian engineering feat that bolstered the push to the Rhine. Yet the jet's shadow persisted, their numbers swelling as fuel shortages plagued the Luftwaffe's props. But Allied jets like the Meteor loomed on the horizon. Frederick visited a field hospital, seeing wounded pilots like Donovan, legs shattered in a jet ambush, who gripped his hand and whispered thanks for the seconds his prop bought to eject. The emotional scars deepened. Miriam received a medal from the king but wore it like lead, her brother's absence a void no victory filled. Thorne pulled Frederick aside amid the mud-churned runways, his grizzled eyes serious. "You've given us the edge, lad, but the endgame's jets. Your work buys the time we need." Winter's bite returned with the Ardennes offensive, testing the Harlan propellers in the frozen hell of the Bulge, where P-51s screamed low over snow-blanketed forests, their 4 blades churning through icing conditions to intercept Luftwaffe reinforcements, outpacing Bf-109 swarms by margins that saved beleaguered ground troops from encirclement. Frederick's team, embedded with a mobile repair unit, braved blizzards to swap damaged units, the alloys holding against thermal shocks that cracked lesser designs, speeds holding at 460 even in sub-zero dives. A desperate mission saw Nora Hale's squadron shield a convoy of Shermans, her Mustangs props propelling her through a gauntlet of flak and fighters, splashing 2 109s before a jet forced her into a evasive spiral that strained the actuators to their limit. Yet they held, allowing her return with vital intelligence. Reports flooded in. Across the front, the props reduced pursuit losses by half, their 100-mile-per-hour advantage turning potential routes into routes of the enemy. Canadian pilots earning double aces in weeks. Jamie, frostbitten but unbowed, fabricated field repairs under artillery fire, his laughter a defiant spark amid the gloom. Miriam analyzed captured Mi-262 wreckage, adapting dampeners from jet tech to fortify the designs against future hybrids. Grant, now a major, led the final sweeps, his Star, a veteran with over 50 hours on Harlan blades, confiding in a rare quiet moment that the war's end felt tangible because of them. Thorne's final orders came from Schaeff, full integration into the victory push, the props the unsung heroes of air supremacy. Frederick stood on a ridge overlooking the Rhine, the river a silver thread under thawing skies. Pride swelling as flights of Mustangs thundered overhead, there were a requiem for the fallen. But the cost etched deep. His brother's unit liberated a camp, the horrors described in trembling script shaking Frederick to his core. A reminder that speed saved skies but not souls. As VE Day dawned in May 1945, the hangars of liberated airfields echoed with silence, broken only by the cheers of returning crews. Frederick Harlan's 4-blade propeller, etched into history as the key that made P-51s untouchable predators, outstripping Messerschmitts and buying the Allies the aerial dominance that sealed the Reich's fate. Demobilization scattered the team, Jamie home to Quebec for a wedding long postponed, Miriam to Montreal's universities to teach the next generation, Thorne to a quiet farm in Kent. But Frederick lingered in England, overseeing the scrapping of prototypes, his calloused hands tracing one final blade as dignitaries pinned a distinguished service order to his tunic. The design's legacy spread. Post-war Mustangs in Canadian service, even civilian racers borrowing the curves, a testament to Toronto ingenuity amid global fire. Grant, retiring with a chest of ribbons, shook his hand at a victory parade in London, eyes misty. "You made us faster than the wind, Fred. Jerry never saw us coming." Yet in the quiet aftermath, Frederick received a classified dossier from Wright Field, revealing Luftwaffe blueprints for a rival four-blade prop, stolen mid-war by spies. His impossible idea, unknowingly shared across lines, hastening both sides' innovations. Boarding a troop ship for home, he gazed at the receding cliffs, the war's scars a map on his soul, wondering if the jet's roar had been silenced only to birth new shadows in the Cold War skies.